Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the sales webinar series that we have here at the Center for Professional Selling at Ball State University. It's my pleasure to have another guest from across the pond, across the Atlantic, where we have Mr. Morten Dalum, who is the co-founder and CEO of a really cool company called Acadel. It is a software as a service platform that helps organizations deal with the extremely critical process of managing change. But before we get into exactly what the product does, I want to actually start talking to Morten about some of the challenges that he sees happening in the business space in his neck of the woods in Denmark, and why he came up with this particular solution that has got me interested. So, Morten, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me here, Deva.
Yeah, indeed. So, Morten, one of the things that got my attention about what you do, about what Acadel does, has got to do with a big aspect of change management, right? So,
Yes.
before we get into what Acadel exactly does, I want to talk to you about why do you think change management is critical today under the current circumstances?
Well, that's a very big question to start out with, but change management or managing change is really relevant both before and after we saw this COVID-19 in the world, because what we are facing in every company, in every organization, is really an increasing amount of changes that we need to deal with. And these changes, whether it's processes, whether it's new skills or new knowledge or things, the reality is that the number of changes we are facing in any organization is really just increasing, and there's no signs that I believe that it will decrease. It's really just something that we need to do. Change is the new normal. The only thing that will not, that will not change is the fact that we need to be able to adapt to change as both as people, I believe, but also as organizations and businesses. Yeah.
Now, one of the things which is, of course, people talk about is that has COVID made change a must for the organizations that you deal with constantly?
I think that organizations or businesses, from my perspective, have had to deal with change much prior to COVID came into the place. Yeah. But I think that this virus and what we are facing right now is really people are being aware that things need to change. And it's more in our mind that we now realize that we need to change to a higher degree than what we did at before COVID-19. Because one example for it is a lot of people who've worked with digitization or the fact that the world is becoming more digital. We have been talking about a lot of things, just sharing information, knowledge about that, what we see in the market. But but what we've seen during the COVID-19 is really an increasing need just for a simple thing as these web meetings that we are setting up. So I think it's more I think the need has been there. COVID is just another layer on top of that, but it's really the perception of people and what people believe in it that has really changed.
But this is what I think is very interesting, because you hit the nail on the head, at least according to me, where I agree with you a lot on this, is change is always something that is constant in organizations, right? So the idea of that moving from a product-centric approach towards a customer-centric approach was something that companies would always talk about, and then get the people to go through the change, and then they would do that, and then they would have new management come in with a new focus, and then again they would have to change. And of course, adding the layer of COVID. But would you say that, as you said, COVID has increased awareness, but it has also meant that organizations have had to rethink how they position themselves to their customers, how they have to interact with their customers, how they have to work internally. And this has meant change, but at a much faster rate. And they cannot afford for their people not to change.
Exactly.
Or run the risk of becoming redundant. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, I think it's really you're really nailing it there, because if we look at the space I'm coming from, the SaaS space, as you said, we are in the SaaS space. You would normally go out to investors and you'd raise money and investments and go through all of that game, for good and worse for that. But the reality is that the investors, when they now in our space look at companies, they say everything has changed. Everything. We don't know the metrics of any business. We don't know what drives the market. We don't know what drives the customers. Everything has really changed where we try to put a formula on that. And I think you could really copy that into any business. If you take a small production company, we have an example locally from where I'm from, and they were traditional B2B manufacturing production company, and they had the traditional salespeople in travel around with the with the bag and just having customer meetings. And early in the COVID crisis, they realized, or they saw the first example where they actually landed a big deal with a German customer without visiting them. And they said, well, how can this actually be? But that's because we are facing a new normal. And really, this is just one small example for what we are what we're facing. Because if we look at it from a much broader perspective, then you could say that governments have changed. Companies or countries have changed, companies have changed, and most importantly, we as human beings have changed, because we've probably, I would say, we've become more purpose-driven. People have realized that working from home is maybe not so bad. We actually have this, what can you say, work-life balance in our life, and most importantly, the leaders have realized that we don't have to sit at the back of our people actually to manage them and to make sure that people are doing their work. So I think a lot of things have happened both on a personal level, on a business level, and even higher from there.
Absolutely. Now, one of the things you said was that I think if you try and take a look at the concept of change management itself, right? So, and if we agree that, yes, the pace has changed, we need to make sure that we quickly come up to speed and everything else. But in your opinion, when you have dealt with companies that have gone through change, either when you were yourself undergoing change as part of being part of an organization, what do you think are some of the challenges that companies usually face when dealing with change?
I think one important aspect is lack of trust. So the leaders not trusting the employees to actually manage the change. And this is really one of my core beliefs is that when there are different ways you can actually approach a change process in an organization. And if you read some of the most popular, books about this, it's always about how to push the change into the organization. So it's really the leaders that need to push it. You could use the words of top-down approach to the change, but that really has a lot of what can you say? I believe there is a lot of difficulties considering change like that. Number one is, are you as a leader certain that you have the answer to your organization's challenges? So if you believe that you got the answer to everything, I may as well promise to you that you're wrong. There are some different perspectives from people in your team, from your organizations. And when you drive these, the opposite way of driving change is really doing it bottom up and really trying to, as a leader, facilitate the way to change more than bringing people the answer to change. And that's what I really believe most people are, or most organizations are failing in the way they approach the change process. So this lack of trust, if you trusted your people, and I can see that from my own story and where I'm coming from, that I've worked as a managing director in a production company, and we didn't go and ask our people. We thought that we should push the change, but that's actually, if you study this area, it's actually wrong. The people, did you know that it's only 16% of people, the global workforce, that is engaged in their job? Only 16%. That means 84% are disengaged or actively disengaged in their job. That's a big challenge when we are trying to drive this change. And that really should say something about our leadership style, because if we have, other study shows that if we have engaged people in our team, then we will create a 20 plus growth year on year. Whereas if we have it only, if we don't have disengaged people, then we only have a growth year on year that's 4.7%. So there's really so many logical reasons for trying to drive the change bottom up and try to consider the role as a leader you have, whether it's a sales leader or what it is, in the change process.
Martin, two things that I want to get your input on. The first one is, a lot of times the not the top down, I'm talking about the people who actually have to go through this change, right? So essentially, a lot of times they might not necessarily know why they're doing this change, right? So don't you think that there is some credence to the fact that top management might be having access to certain information that will necessitate them to change, and consequently, that a lot of times you might have employees who may not agree because they're very, very comfortable in what they're doing at that point in time, that you have to make hard choices. So in that kind of situation, wouldn't it make sense for top management to push it top down?
Yeah.
So you see what I mean? Under what conditions would that work, top down driven?
Well, top down certainly works and is also a recommended way forward when you really need to do a big change. We have the example of a company here in Denmark, the Danish pump manufacturer Grundfos. And they've shared some articles or stories about what happened in that company in the early part of Corona or COVID-19. And what they did was they really centralized the decision making. So I think it was the first 2 months where they say, we have some issues that we need to deal with. We have to make sure that our people are safe.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that our company is financially ready for what is in front of us. But when we have dealt with those two issues and we are certain that we have covered those two issues, then we will step back as leaders and really facilitate or let the people facilitate what needs to happen from here. But we have taken some certain decisions about safety, and that can be democratized as a decision making.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
And also if you have this, what can you say, you need to make a dramatic turnaround. But the important step is really when you make the switch in your management style, because all the employees, they will also accept that there are some certain difficult decisions that need to be taken. But I think it's a very strong one that when you say, now let's switch this approach, and then now we've taken the decision, now let the people work for us and take the better decisions in the organizations than we can as a centralized management team.
Wonderful. So before I get to my second point, so I want to build up on what you just said out here. So what you're saying then is that certain times that you need top management to really step up and say, this is why we need to do it for the benefit of all of us, right?
Yeah.
But then that assumes that the people on the field are not the top management. There has to be a certain amount of trust.
Yes.
That my top management is looking out for me.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
How important is that going to be critical to make sure that realization amongst employees that this is going to happen, but I'm going to trust my management to do what is in my best interest, right? Because that is what is critical for you to make sure that my employees say, for some things, it's taken out of my hands. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You are really nailing it here. Obviously, if the people don't trust the management or management don't trust people, then we need to get started there because and it's both ways.
Yeah.
And I think that to get started with it, because it's a necessity to drive the changes bottom up. It is that we have this trust and a way that you could deal with it as one of the managers or directors in the company is really to be fragile in what you do. This Grundfos example that we have is headed by a top guy who's not afraid of saying that I'm in doubt about this and that, but I believe that we should go this way. We don't necessarily need, if we have these strong, what can you say, industrial, typical elephants leaders that we all know, then it'll be very difficult to build that trust. But whereas if you have a more, what can you say, a more human approach to your leadership, then it would be much more natural for your people to trust you and thereby also follow what is said. So there's certainly a lot of trust as one aspect in it, but there are also other things in it. You could say that people with or organizations with a big purpose would also, or who are purpose driven, would also be easier for them to drive this bottom up approach to it. You could say that organizations that have a learning approach or want to include learning in their team would have would be better to dealing with the bottom up approach, because we can say, well, we don't have all the answers, but we need to go on a route where we can actually explore that and make that okay for both the leaders but also for the team to say that we don't have all the answers, but we need to find the way together. Are just some of the ways, or what can you say, elements that's important to build the trust and to get people on board on the with the changes we are facing.
Now, the second question I actually had before we got into the other discussion was, to what extent do you think that a lot of times when you have senior management doing a kind of a top-down push or whatever they do, right? A lot of times you get to be senior manager, of course, if you're not necessarily come somewhere else, but you've actually gone all the way up. You started from the bottom, you went all the way up. But also what it means is that when you go higher and higher, a lot of times you forget what it means to be in the trenches.
Yeah.
You forget that when you make a decision higher up, that it has implication on the day-to-day functioning of my people, and you are making decisions that are going to impact how the people on the floor work on a daily basis, how that's reflected in their KPIs, their metrics, and things like that. Right? Now, to what extent should managers think even about that? Yes, you need to have top-down driven, but how many of the companies that you had a chance to work with actually at least make the effort to understand what would that change mean for the normal routines of my people? Because wouldn't you say that that's important for it to be successful?
Yeah. I would say that we are not having any customers on working with them if they don't have the same belief as we do. If they believe that top down is the way to drive change, well, then we can point them in other directions with other solutions that will make them successful with that. So when we talk with, I had an example with a customer meeting today, first customer meeting we had. And one of the first things we are trying to outline with the customer is their culture, how they take decisions, how they are driving these approaches. A very key element or key question for us to get an understanding of where the customer is actually who or what makes a good leader in the organizations. How are you running your leadership programs? Because if that's really top down, the approach to it, if it's the best sales guy we are hiring in as this new sales manager, as opposed to who is having the right belief about what leadership is about, that's really where we can see some of the big differences. Because there are a lot of, I think that I saw a statistics about this, that there are about 25% of the world's companies, they believe that this way of driving change bottom up is really a good idea. So we don't want to work with the 75% because we have too big of a obstacle to go through. But I can share one story with you. We are working with a company here in Denmark where the employees get to choose their own manager.
Wow.
That's flipped upside down. That is putting a lot of pressure on the leaders where they actually need to deliver value for their team. But imagine what it does with the culture. Imagine what it does with, this is probably one of the most profitable companies within their industry. But that's because they have a good purpose, they have strong leaders, and they have just really flipped the way they are working in an organization.
Wow. At some point in time, we should talk separately of this conversation to see how they do it, because that has an enormous responsibility then on the organization initially. Again, it becomes a chicken or egg, saying that what kind of employees do you want to hire in the first place, right? Because you don't want petty employees who say, okay, I want life easy. So if my life is going to be easy, I'm going to choose a manager who's my best friend, because that's not what you want in a manager, right? So that again fundamentally means that you need to have clear recruitment policies and ideas in place about how this needs to be done, a governance structure in place that's going to make this happen. Am I right in understanding this?
Yeah, I think so. I think that, well, I'm coming from a manufacturing perspective. I'm coming from a traditional production company. Actually, I work for one of the oldest companies in Denmark. And when I first heard about this, I was really struggling to understand what is this all about. I'm not sure that I yet believe that's a way to go forward, but I like the idea that we, who's the leader for? Is it for the business or is it for the people? Do we trust, if we believe that we have the best people in our team, then why shouldn't we give them the responsibility to really drive the company? And why shouldn't we give them the opportunity to really, implement the ideas and the way of work and the culture and everything, because they're probably better at it than we are. It's a matter of are you working in an organization and your cultural belief is that you are one brain and 1,000 hands? Are you 1,000 hands or 1,000 brains and 1,000 hands?
Yeah.
And that, if we think about it that way, that really changed perspective, and it certainly changed the way we need to think about leadership. Because if we go from one brain to 1,000 brains, that really means that we have a facilitating learning role that we need to implement in our organization.
Well, I mean, at some point, I'm going to be really curious to see how they do it, because when we think about, I'm thinking now about sales leaders. So if I have to choose a sales leader, it could be that my sales leader might not be in the territory that I want. So if that's the case, how do I make it? So I'm not only thinking of sales. Of course, there's a lot more to it than just the sales organization as well. Huh?
Yeah.
Okay. So now let me come into Acadel. So tell me, given your beliefs, how is that reflected in the product that you created, and why did you create this product, and what is it about?
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good question. How long time do we have?
So let's say 10 minutes. Yeah.
No, that's okay. Well, as I said, I was coming from the industry, a traditional production companies, and what I realized as a leader was that we were moving far too slow. The company was moving far too slow. We had not so many ideas, but we really were struggling to implement new concepts, new products, new processes. While IT systems, we could talk about that for 4 years, but nothing happened. And really, it was because we had this approach that, or the way these types of organization works. So what I decided to do after that job was really to figure out how could we speed up how we implement change or be better at managing changes in organization, whether it had to do with educating our leaders or change processes in sales or in operations or implementing sustainability initiatives in our organization. And what I learned very quickly was that it doesn't make sense for me to go out and tell people what they need to do, because then I'm not any better at that than the traditional management approach that I'm talking about here. What we really need to do is really to make this need for change, or the need for interest for driving change, really build that into people. We really need to motivate and engage people to drive the change, because otherwise we'll just have people being against the change. So what's the best way of doing that? And it's really very simple, and it's really one of the probably one of the oldest advice is that rather than tell people, we need to ask them. And if we ask people, then we can really get new perspective. We can be get new ideas, we can see new concepts, we can see that the world is suddenly opening up with opportunities that we didn't have before. So what we are doing is really, what can you say, with our platform is really facilitating that we can ask questions to people rather than we go and tell them what to do. So if you take an example, for instance, we had a sales organization where we were implementing a CRM system, and rather than just from the sales excellence people just making the model and go out and push it and say, now you do this, now you do that, then we showed them, well, these are the perspectives with the CRM system. What we want to do is to be able to be more productive. We want to be able to create a better reporting. So this is what the CRM system is all about. Now go and use this system, and then tell us back what we need to improve. How can we improve that? How can we make it easier for you to implement that? How can we make it better for our business or even for our customer that we are using this type of tool? So we could have gone out and told people, this is what you need to do. Now use it this way, this way, this way. But as we know, if we go and push people on that, we'll just get a lot of pushback. So really trying to facilitate a process where we have a two-way communication, where we listen to the people that's in the middle of it, try to get some input and be curious about what does this mean, because we're all on a learning journey to understand that. So what we really do is facilitating a process, with the CRM system, a process where we ask people, how can we improve our business by doing this? We give people some videos about what it's all about, but most importantly, we let the salespeople talk together. We let them communicate, collaborate, and try to find ways to actually improve that. And by that, we simply engage people. And that's what Acadal is all about. That's what the platform, and that's how we facilitate a change process. Yeah. I think you need to unmute, Diva.
So I love the example that you gave, because my whole dissertation 17 years ago was how companies fail at implementing, at that time was Salesforce automation. It was not CRM then. And it's essentially the whole thing saying that you had a much more top-down approach towards saying, okay, we are going to implement this and you have to use it. And then it led to a lot of failure. But that's the whole point, right? Because the fact is that your solution, as is any solution, is only as good as how well it is implemented, right?
Yes.
So essentially, and that's what I would say is that if a company says, okay, we've already made the decision to use a CRM, now the question is, I can use your platform to say, how can I successfully deploy what a decision has already been made?
Exactly.
But if I'm thinking about really, if that becomes the norm of how we want to think differently, even before you decide on a platform,
yes,
you actually involve having a conversation saying, okay, tell me about what do you do? So if it's sales, okay, tell us about how can we help you increase your performance or increase your way of looking at things, and then work upwards. And then decide on a platform based on what you, which is great, because either way, you're at least making sure that the second way that I suggested might be the best way to get the most appreciation and acceptance. But of course, even if an organization has already made a decision, they could still have a more effective implementation if they get people involved at the right. So
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And you can say in the example you have here, we have done some sprints where we said, how can we raise that, the top line 10% next year? What does it take? And one example could be, well, we need to do more cold calling, or we need to be more effective in our work, thereby implementing a CRM. Or it could be we should spend more on advertising or something like that. But then you can actually take this CRM and build on that and say, well, maybe that's a good idea. Run a new sprint on that and say, well, what should we use it for? Where should we do that? And really keep people engaged all the way from we have the idea until that we have really changed the behavior in the organization, or adopted this change that we are facing. But we need to consider it as what can you say? It's a process. It's a never-ending process. It's something we need to, when we're done with the CRM, then there will come new changes. Then there will be new things we are facing. Maybe an idea is to shut down the CRM because it didn't work. It didn't work as planned. Fine. Then, but the important thing is we need to keep the wheel going. We need to keep implementing change, be better at implementing change. It's not so important if we succeed with each individual change, but it's important that we really be masters of how to drive change, because that's really will make the difference in the companies going forward.
I love this, and I think for me is, if I were to try and take a look at what you're suggesting here, I think it's just not for an organization to think like this, but if I'm a salesperson and I want to sell a complex solution to a customer,
Yeah.
even to convince a customer first,
Yes.
I could use a platform like Acadel, assuming that the customer wants to interact with you, to actually, so it's not just a company saying, I'm going to go through change. I should be looking at this. I personally think that if I am any kind of a solution provider, where it, at least if my salespeople have to use to convince a potential prospect or a customer, where there's going to be significant change in the way the customer has to make changes to the way they work,
yes,
to integrate your solution into theirs,
yeah,
that it has to become part of your sales tool.
Yes.
To be able to convince. Of course, not every customer is going to be willing to do that exercise, but you could provide it as a consulting service.
Yes. And that's, again, you're hitting it, really. This is exactly what we do. We are both working with, as we say, the customers that want to drive the change internally, but we also have a lot of partners who want to drive the change externally, meaning they want to drive the change for their customer. And the role is, what can you say? The way to go about it is different, because you're coming as an external into a company and drive that. But the reality is that if you drive these changes bottom up, then you'll be far more successful with the product you're selling, trying to sell to your customer. So both things are what we are trying to help our customers and our partners really succeed with today. But it's all about driving change, and try to do that effectively bottom up, and really try to engage people in some of the changes, because then we'll see far best results from that.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. But Morten, thank you so much for taking the time. I know that you're out there getting customers, trying to convince investors and stuff like that. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you, Deva.
And I wish you all the best with how you're going to change the change landscape in Denmark and the rest of the world as well. So thank you so much.